letting down protection of our planet.
Can I congratulate my honourable friend on being the new mission champion for clean energy, but he's absolutely right. Why the SNP make promises they break, this Labour government determines to deliver for Scotland, and maybe that's why SNP MPs in this House voted against GB Energy. We are delivering for Scotland, and we promised GB Energy, that's been delivered. We promised to end austerity, that's been delivered. We promised to make work pay, that's been delivered. While the SNP only deliver managed decline for Scotland, we are getting on with improving the economy.
Clear plans for Great British Energy, but there are very clear plans to end new licences for oil and gas in the North Sea. And Gary Smith of the GMB has said that stopping new licences is the employment equivalent of a Grangemouth refinery closing nearly every week from 2025 to 2030. So when is the Secretary of State going to stand up for Scotland, oppose the Right Honourable Member for Doncaster North, protect jobs and ensure we don't have more imports with higher emissions?
Mr Speaker, GB Energy is there with the National Wealth Fund to deliver that just transition and clean power by 2030. Oil and gas in the North Sea will be here for decades to come, and I would ask the honourable gentleman to work with us to deliver that just transition rather than scaremongering for the workers of the North East.
Secretary of State Andrew Bowen.
Mr Speaker, despite mighty work by Conservative members of the other place, sadly the GB Energy Bill continues to make its progress through the House of Lords. The chairman of that company, to remind you, Mr Speaker, that's the chairman based in Manchester, leading a company headquartered in Aberdeen, in committee in the summer claimed GB Energy would directly employ 1,000 people. By November, that had fallen to 300 people. So, can he tell the House what is the figure, what are those jobs, where will they be based, and can he tell us once and for all what on earth GB Energy will actually do?
Mr Speaker, I'm surprised that the Shadow Secretary of State is championing the lines of the SNP. GB Energy is headquartered in Scotland. In fact, it's headquartered in his own region that he represents in Scotland, capitalised with £125 million, bringing valuable jobs to his own constituency. I suspect he might want to go back to his constituency this weekend and explain to his constituents why he doesn't want those new jobs and new industries of the future coming to his constituency.
Christine Blackman.
Question 7, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 7 and 9 together. The Labour Government's choice to protect the pensions triple lock means that millions of women pensioners will see their yearly pensions rise by up to £470 in April and by up to £1,900 over this Parliament. This is in stark contrast with the party opposite. They'd cut the state pension of over 1 million Scots. The Conservatives are still in chaos, announcing policies on the hoof that would mean a raid on pension pots. Meanwhile, this Labour Government is taking tough decisions and actions to clean up the Tories' economic mess.
Christine Blackman.
Does the Minister and indeed the Secretary of State agree with Labour MSPs in Scotland that WASPy women deserve compensation?
Mr Speaker, I do appreciate that campaigners are disappointed. However, the Honourable Lady, I'm afraid, has got herself in a bit of a fankle, and she's eliding two separate issues, a decision about the legality of the changes and the question of compensation. The Ombudsman's findings show evidence that the vast majority of WASPy women did know that the state pension age was changing. It therefore be difficult to justify up to £10 billion on a compensation scheme and conclude that that is a fair, proportionate or good value for money use of public funds.
Can I just say, will members please look at where the questions are coming from? It's disrespectful and it's totally not the way we should be carrying on. These are senior members who know better. He's a good example of a new member, Anne Davis.
Thank you, Mr Llefarydd. In 2021, the Secretary of State previously called for a vote of redress of 1950s women, urging UK government to get on the front foot and offer serious compensation to those affected. 1950s-born women in Scotland and Wales have seen the same broken promises from Labour, with the now First Minister of Wales pledging in 2018 that a Labour government would right this justice. So with the Secretary of State, the Welsh First Minister and Labour politicians across the whole of these isles now turning their backs on 1950s women in Scotland, Wales and elsewhere, why should these women ever again believe a word they say?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm afraid there's another honourable member who's in a bit of a fankle. The question about the legality of the changes has been settled by the courts. The question of compensation, which the Honourable Lady and her allies will have to answer, is why they think £10 billion, up to £10 billion of public money should be spent. Is this proportionate? Is it fair? Is it feasible? And is it value for money? The government's view is it is not.
Chris Kane.
Thank you. Does the Minister agree with me? Does the Minister agree with me that alongside the triple lock and pensions, the most important thing for women pensioners in Scotland is to fix our NHS, and that the SNP government needs to act urgently to ensure vulnerable Scots don't face what even the SNP Health Secretary says are unacceptable waits for treatment?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I couldn't agree more. Scotland's NHS is in crisis. 1 in 6 Scots are on a waiting list. The UK government has provided a record investment to fix Scotland's public services. The Scottish government, led by the SNP, should get on with it.
Lord MacDonald.
The most common problem raised by women pensioners in East Renfrewshire to me is, like the member for Stirling says, the enormous waiting lists. And with researchers from Oxford University, Strathclyde University and Edinburgh University predicting that by the time the SNP leave office they'll be headed towards 1 million of Scots on waiting lists, how can we make sure that the billions provided in the Labour budget don't go down the same drain as everything else that is given to the SNP?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Scots today, 1 in 6 are on a waiting list. We face a housing emergency and a very stubborn attainment gap. Nobody could look round Scotland and say it is going in the right direction. That's the choice people will have to make at 2026. Is Scotland going in the right or wrong direction? Canny Scots, I'm sure, will make choices in the interests of their families and say that it's time to replace a failing SNP government.
Stephen Gittins.
And I welcome that welcome from the Labour benches. The Minister campaigned on compensation for WASPy women as the Secretary of State for Scotland did. So will she tell me, if she won't listen to the women, if she won't listen to the Ombudsman, will she listen to Scottish Labour MSPs who called for compensation?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, a third member in a dreadful fanco. What we said at the election was that we would wait the Ombudsman's report, we would examine it and we would take a view. We have taken a view. We have taken a view that up to 10 billion of public money should not be spent providing compensation on a decision that was legal and which has been concluded the vast majority of 1950 boards women were aware.
Stephen Gittins.
Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State recently reacted to Labour's dip in the polls in Scotland by saying the voters didn't like honesty. I wonder if it was more to do with Labour not keeping their commitment to women pensioners, or was it more to do with saying that you'd decrease fuel bills and they went up? Was it to do with saying you tackle child poverty and then take on some of the most regressive Tory policies on the 2-child cap? And as we approach Burns Night, I wonder if the Bard was right when he said, "Dare to be honest and fear no Labour." Whereas nowadays I wonder if he'd say, "Dare to be honest and fear the voters."
Mr Speaker, polls come, polls go. The fact remains this Labour government has provided record investment for Scottish public services. I suggest the honourable member invest in a notepad so he can keep track.
Right, we now come to Prime Minister's questions. David Reid. Question number 1. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The senseless, barbaric murder of 3 young girls in Southport was devastating. A measure of justice has been done, but for the victims, the injured and the affected, we must see a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. As part of the public inquiry, Mr Speaker, we will not let any institution deflect from their failures. Mr Speaker, next Monday marks Holocaust Memorial Day. Visiting Auschwitz last week only strengthened my resolve to build a national Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre beside this Parliament. Mr Speaker, the whole House will also welcome the release of Emily Damari and other hostages from Gaza. We must now see the ceasefire deal implemented in full, the release of the remaining hostages and a surge in aid into Gaza for citizens. Mr. Speaker, may I also welcome Cheryl Corbell, whose young daughter Olivia was murdered in awful circumstances, and her sister Antonia to the Chamber. I've met them twice, and we will change the law so that most serious offenders attend their sentencing hearings. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in the House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before Christmas, I received nearly 1,000 handwritten letters from pupils at St Peter's Secondary School in Exeter. Each letter strongly advocated for greater support to tackle the mental health challenges faced by young people, with many sharing deeply unsettling personal stories. I'm committed to improving local mental health services to help young people build the resilience they need to live happy and healthy lives. However, Mr. Speaker, I know these challenges are not faced and not unique to my constituency and are being faced by children across our country. So can the Prime Minister please outline what steps his government are taking to enhance mental health support for our children nationwide?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising an issue of huge concern in his constituency and in all constituencies. Far too many young people are not receiving the care that they need. So we will provide access to specialist mental health professionals in every school, recruit an additional 8,500 staff to deal with children and adult mental health services, and roll out our Young Future hubs in every community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Marcus Campbell-Savers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will understand the importance of farming to the economy of my constituency in Penrith and Solway and Cumbria as a whole. With recent reports of foot and mouth outbreaks in Germany and concerns being expressed over transmission to the United Kingdom, would the Prime Minister assure this House that all government departments are on high alert and vigilant in monitoring the situation, particularly at places of entry, including airports where meat import controls can be lax? We must avoid the disaster that this would bring to UK farming.
Prime Minister.
Thank him for his question. We will do whatever it takes, Mr. Speaker, to protect farmers from the risk posed by foot and mouth. And that's why we acted swiftly to ban the imports of cattle, pigs and sheep and their products from Germany to protect farmers. We will not hesitate, Mr. Speaker, to restrict imports from additional countries if the disease spreads. We will keep the situation under close and careful review.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I take this opportunity to welcome the release of hostages, including Emily Damari, from barbaric captivity? I also know that the thoughts of many will be with the victims of the Southport killings. There are important questions to answer, and I will return to those after the case is concluded. Between 2009 and 2022, the OECD found children in England rose up global league tables in maths, reading and science. Conservative government action means English schools now top the Western world at maths and reading. The Prime Minister's Schools Bill, which is being voted on in committee this week, reverses the improvements that made this happen. This bill is an act of vandalism. It is wrecking a cross-party consensus that lasted for decades. Why does the Prime Minister think that so many school leaders are criticising this bill?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it was Labour that introduced academies in the first place to drive up standards. Academies are here to stay and will continue to drive up standards. That's what the bill is about. But also in that bill are important provisions for protecting children, including a provision to stop abusers taking children out of school, a unique identifier to ensure the whereabouts of all children are known. What did the Leader of the Opposition do? She instructed all of them to vote against those measures.
He didn't even bother voting on that bill, Mr. Speaker. And he talks about safeguarding measures. That's not what the issue is. It's about the reforms that he is changing. We have an example of where these reforms were not introduced. Wales, which has been under Labour control for 2 decades. Welsh educational outcomes have tumbled down international league tables. Poor children in England now do better than wealthier children in Wales. This bill denies children the guarantee that their failing schools will be turned into a better academy. It is an attack on excellence, it is an attack on higher standards, it is an attack on aspiration. This bill is the worst of socialism, Mr. Speaker, and isn't it deprived children in England who will pay the price?
Mr. Speaker, as I say, we introduced academies, we're committed to them, we're driving standards up. But this bill is important because it also sets up breakfast clubs for the very children that she claims to champion. It limits the expense of school uniform and it puts in place vital protections for children. She has to answer the question, why did she instruct all of them to vote against child protection measures?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister thinks that he can distract people from what is wrong with this bill. This is not about breakfast clubs and school uniforms. Teachers and parents will be horrified at just how bad this bill is. Even his own MPs may not realise it, but the bill will cut teachers' pay. It cuts pay for 20,000 teachers. His Education Secretary says there is not a ceiling for pay. They're all shaking their heads. They clearly haven't read the bill. She hasn't read the bill either. Because Clause 45 means teachers' pay will be capped. Did the Prime Minister know that the bill, as it stands, will cut teachers' pay?
Mr. Speaker, we do need flexibility in our schools. And if she'd hopped off social media for a while, she would have seen the amendment that was put down this morning to achieve that end. But she says this bill is not about child protection. We had a young child killed who was taken out of a school by an abuser. This bill closes that gap. That is urgently needed. We have children who have not gone back to school since COVID. This bill closes that gap. She can make her points on academies. We can debate academies, but to vote against the bill is a disgrace on all of them.
This is nonsense, Mr. Speaker, and the amendment he's talking about does not address this issue. He raises academies. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like every other parent, I believe all our children should have the best teachers. Apart from cutting their pay, listen to what the head of Year 11, Mr. Speaker, at Michaela, the head of Year 11 at Michaela, the most successful school in the country, came from the armed forces. The headmistress says that with Labour's new rules, she would never have been able to hire him. Those are the academy freedoms I'm talking about. This bill would have blocked that veteran from teaching. The bill implies that doctors are not sufficiently qualified to teach biology, that Olympic medalists can't teach PE. Why is the Prime Minister closing down routes into teaching when we should be opening up more?
She knows that's not right. No, it's not. Look at the provisions in the bill. But to say there ought to be qualified teachers in our schools should not be extraordinary or opposed. And we had far too many examples in our secondary schools under their watch of teachers missing when we needed maths teachers. They championed maths. We didn't have enough maths teachers in our secondary schools, and I want every single child to have the best possible education.
Kemi Badenoch.
The facts speak for themselves. The standards went up under Conservative governments. What we need to know is who is benefiting. Mr. Speaker, everyone is asking who is benefiting from these changes. It's not teachers. Their pay is being capped. It's not parents. Their choices are being restricted. It's definitely not children. Their outcomes will get worse. So who is benefiting? It's the trade unions. The National Education Union sent out a tick list proving that after a decade and a half, they are finally getting their way. Why is the Education Secretary allowing trade unions to run her department and ruin children's education?
The bill benefits the children who need the nourishment of a breakfast club. The bill benefits the families that can't afford uniforms. The bill benefits the children who are currently out of school and nobody knows where they are. The bill benefits the children who could be taken out of school by abusers if this bill doesn't go through. She should change her mind and support these vital provisions.
The Prime Minister needs to get out more and speak to schools. I was at the Harris Academy just this month, and what are they saying? That this bill reverses 2 decades of progress, imposing Labour's new curriculum on every school, taxing the education of children with special needs, excluding talented outsiders. The closed shop is back. This is pure educational vandalism. And alongside these attacks, removing single-word Ofsted judgments so parents cannot see the standards slipping. It is the same old Labour. Bad outcomes for all children, excellence for none. Mr. Speaker, I know what it's like to go to a school which didn't care about standards. This is a tragedy in the making. The key changes in this bill were not in their election manifesto. Isn't that because he knew parents and teachers would reject them?
Parents and teachers know we introduced academies. Parents and teachers know we're driving by standards. We're committed to them. They're part of the future. We will continue to focus on standards. And she talks about special need. She's got a nerve. I don't know. And they know it. Remember them. They have asked me questions, these Prime Minister's questions, about the appalling situation of special needs under their watch. We're going to fix that mess like we're fixing every other mess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parents should feel confident that when their child is sick, they can take them to their local hospital to be treated as soon as possible. But last year, when my son was having difficulty breathing, like many parents, I couldn't take him to the Alexandra Hospital in Redditch, as paediatric services were temporarily closed in 2016 and have never been reinstated. As part of this government's record investment into our NHS, would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me to explore ways to enable local integrated care boards to reinstate critical services for growing towns like Redditch?
Prime Minister. Well, I thank him for raising this important issue, and I know he's campaigned on it for a very long time. We are putting, Mr. Speaker, a record £25 billion investment into the NHS as part of our plan for change. Building an NHS fit for the future means places like Redditch will see lower waiting lists and services that reflect their needs. Whilst, Mr. Speaker, responsibility over service rests with the appropriate NHS Commissioner, I will ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant Minister to discuss the issues.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the Prime Minister's opening remarks about the Southport killings and the Holocaust Memorial Day? Can I particularly join him in expressing our immense relief at the release of Emily Damari and celebrate the fact she's back with her mum, Mandy, and the rest of her family. Let's hope we can get all the hostages released as soon as possible and the ceasefire turns into a lasting peace. Mr. Speaker, last week I urged the Prime Minister to speed up the Social Care Commission so we can get the changes people need implemented this year. The very next day it was announced that the chair of the Social Care Commission was also going to chair another important inquiry into grooming gangs. So the Prime Minister says that the job of chairing the Social Care Commission is so enormous that it's not possible to complete it within 3 years. Yet he also says that the chair of that commission, Baroness Casey, has got enough free time over the next few months to chair another inquiry. Very good point. Can the Prime Minister explain how both these things can be true?
Mr. Speaker, Baroness Casey is well placed to conduct the audit into grooming gangs, given her hard-hitting report on exploitation in Rotherham. It does not, he raises the issue, it does not affect her work on the Independent Commission on Adult Social Care, which begins in April. But as he knows, that report, the first part of that report, will report next year, so we can deliver recommendations as we receive them. And he knows that already we're introducing fair pay agreements, providing more money for the social care funding and putting up the allowance. So we're already taking steps. There will be a two-part report. We will act on the recommendations as they arrive, but this needs to be done properly.
Sir Ed Davey.
I still don't think the Prime Minister is making social care reform the priority that it needs. It's urgent. And so I'm going to keep coming back to this and holding to account. But, Mr. Speaker, turning now to the United States, Can the Prime Minister guarantee that he will not sell out Britain's fantastic farmers to Donald Trump in a trade deal that undermines our high food and animal welfare standards in the way that the Conservatives sold them out in the Australia and New Zealand deals?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will work with the US, we will work with other countries, but we will never lower our standards.
Durham Puffey.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of my constituents across Southampton Itchen have had to put up with years of misery because of unsafe fire protection in their own homes, developers dragging their feet and leaseholders having to foot the bill for mistakes they didn't make. Does the Prime Minister agree that enough is enough and it's time for developers to make all homes safe? And will he reassure leaseholders who bought their homes in good faith that this government has their back?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this really important issue. Too many buildings are still unsafe and the speed of delivery has been far too slow. Our action plan sets out measures to identify buildings at risk and fix them faster. And my message, Mr. Speaker, is clear. The funding is there to fix this, and there's no excuse not to deliver for residents.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Expanding London's airports and building a third runway at Heathrow would be incredibly irresponsible in the midst of a climate emergency, flying in the face of the Climate Change Committee's advice. The Prime Minister clearly knows this because he and 7 Cabinet colleagues voted against a third runway at Heathrow in 2018. So can the Prime Minister confirm what is his position now?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to comment on speculation. He knows that we are, as a government, we are committed to growth, we're committed to the aviation sector and to our climate obligations. But I'm not going to take lectures from those who talk about climate change but oppose vital renewable infrastructure in their own constituency.
Solar farms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Swindon North, we have the Panatoni Park development. It is one of the largest employment developments in Europe. It's got massive potential for growth. Will the Prime Minister join me in acknowledging the site for boosting economic growth in not only my region but the country, and will he come and visit it with me? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
At the heart of our plan for change is growth, Mr. Speaker, to fund our public services, create good jobs and raise living standards across the country. He's right to champion one of the largest brownfield sites in the UK, which could create over 11,000 jobs on site and add £1.2 billion to the economy. It underlines the importance of this government bringing economic stability, creating the National Wealth Fund and driving up growth.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the Prime Minister visited Epsom Hospital, where he committed to not just paper over the cracks in the NHS after years of Conservative lies. Yet on Monday, his government confirmed that our St Helier Hospital will develop these wounds and the hospital will crumble. Mr. Speaker, St Helier Hospital will not survive the delay this has introduced. People will die and NHS staff will break. So I ask the Prime Minister, will he apologise to my constituents as they wait years for a new hospital building? And will he visit the hospital with me to witness first-hand the dire situation our residents face?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he's right to raise the concerns of his constituents, and I'm not surprised that they're frustrated or even angry at the lack of delivery under the previous government. There was no credible plan. Mr. Speaker, they shut. Let me read the Infrastructure and Projects Authority's verdict on what we inherited. This is their words. There are major issues.
Prime Minister. Mr. Phil, I expect better from the front bench, and I'm sure you're going to show better, Prime Minister.
I think he was Liz Truss's right-hand man, so we wouldn't expect anything else. The verdict on the plan that he is talking about was this. Major issues. This is their record. They should be chuckling. Major issues on the definition, the schedule, the budget, the quality and the delivery. It was a fiction. Always was.
Joe Platt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alongside Greater Manchester MPs, I recently met constituents who shared distressing accounts of malpractice by a spinal surgeon affecting many across the region. They have formed an injured staff and patient group, but despite a review, they feel justice hasn't been served and the Hospital Trust is yet to conduct a full patient recall. Will the Prime Minister arrange a meeting with the group and the relevant minister to help them get the justice that they deserve?
Well, I thank her for raising this awful case, and the stories and accounts that she puts forward are heartbreaking and deeply concerning, and I will make sure that she and the group receive a meeting with the relevant health minister at the earliest opportunity.
Sir Benedict.
When it comes to his budget, which raised taxes, raised borrowing and raised public spending as a strategy for economic growth, when is the Prime Minister going to accept the words of the Labour Prime Minister in the 1970s, who explained to a Labour conference that in all candour that option no longer exists, and that the only way to obtain sustained economic growth will be by cutting taxes and cutting regulation?
Prime Minister.
Well, he must have missed recent reports. The ONS has just said that we've got the highest investment for 19 years. The PwC have just said that this is the second best place to invest in the world. The IMF have just upgraded growth, now saying we're predicted to be the fastest growing major European economy. Wages are up and inflation is down. That's after just 6 months.
Rosie Writing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kettering General Hospital is where I was born and cared for as a premature baby. But after 14 years of the Conservatives underfunding the NHS, that same maternity ward is partially closed because of RAC. And after giving birth, mothers are transported outside through the car park to receive postnatal care. So will the Prime Minister visit Kettering General to discuss how we can support services like the maternity ward and while we await our rebuild?
Prime Minister. Well, she's been a determined champion of Kettering General Hospital, and rightly so. And there are deep anger about the delay to the works because of the failure to have a plan on the party opposite. But while we implement our affordable and deliverable plan to build a new hospital, I can reassure her, Mr. Speaker, that the RAC identified at Kettering General is being mitigated and replaced through the National RAC programme.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before Christmas, Lord Robertson, who's leading the Strategic Defence Review, came before the Defence Select Committee and told us that he couldn't guarantee that the strategic outcomes from the review would be fully funded. Recently, we've also heard in media reports that the review might be delayed until the autumn, so that's a delay of 6 months. Will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to state categorically to the House that the Strategic Defence Review, with its important requirements for the defence of our nation, will be fully funded and delivered on time?
Prime Minister.
Of course, we're committed to that because this is a serious review into our defence. It needs to make sure that we understand the challenges we face and have the capability to deal with those challenges in the modern era. So that's the exercise that's going through. We've committed to the path to 2.5%. As he knows, the last time 2.5% was spent on defence was under the last Labour government. And that is the difference between the approach on this side of the House and the approach on that side of the House.
Harpley Temple.
Huddersfield Royal Infirmary has recently reduced its elective waiting list from a high of 4,000 to just 20. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to NHS staff at my local hospital? Will he ensure that the NHS learns from the HRI's innovative approaches, such as the use of AI for scans and its partnership with Huddersfield University's National Health Innovation Campus? And whilst the Prime Minister does his hospital tour, can I also invite him to Huddersfield to see the transformative work being done?
Prime Minister. Look, can I thank her because the achievements of the hard-working staff at Huddersfield Royal Infirmary prove that you can bring down waiting times through our plan for change. And it is important we're applying that best practice and innovation across the NHS. We must do more. We inherited record waiting lists and we are now bringing them down.
Andrew Snowden.
very much, Mr. Speaker. In what is supposed to be a honeymoon period for a new government, the Prime Minister has sacked his Chief of Staff, forced his City Minister and Transport Secretary to resign, whilst Number 10 has been briefing against the Pensions Secretary, Home Secretary and Education Secretary. Is it not time that the Prime Minister accepts that the root causes at the heart of this government are with him, not them?
We just won a landslide victory, and we've got a massive majority. We're getting on with the job. Mr. Speaker, I don't think we saw. Look at the sheer number of ministers that they got through on a yearly basis, causing instability in every conceivable department.
Paul Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2016, I was diagnosed with colon cancer and had excellent treatment at Huddersfield Royal Infirmary. I was one of the lucky ones, as the Tory governments after 2015 failed in the fight against cancer, with over 380,000 patients in England not treated on time. What assurance can the Prime Minister offer Colne Valley residents that the reforms and extra investment he's announced will address this issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I start by wishing him a speedy recovery from his recent treatment and thank the doctors and nurses who treated him. Under the previous government, there was no progress made in diagnosing cancer at stage 1 and 2 between 2013 and 2021. That is an appalling inheritance. We are spending £1.5 billion on new surgical hubs and diagnostic scanners to ensure cancer patients get the care that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Eating disorders are the mental health disorder with the highest mortality rate. We have 1.2 million sufferers at least. Some are being told that they are now too ill to be treated, yet eating disorders are entirely treatable. Today, the Eating Disorder APPG is publishing its report of how to make eating disorder services fit for purpose. Can I ask the Prime Minister to pay very close attention to that report?
Prime Minister.
Can I start by recognising her dedicated work and campaigning on this issue for many years. NHS England is expanding eating disorder treatment services, including crisis care and intensive home treatment. And as she knows, the Online Safety Act will prevent children from encountering harmful product content that promotes eating disorders to services. And we will look very carefully, obviously, at the report that is being published and consider its recommendations.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the past few days, Luton has suffered 2 stabbings, as well as 1 woman murdered, another seriously injured, and a manhunt is currently underway for the suspect. This January alone, there has been at least 12 recorded violent offences in Luton. After decades of being funded as a rural police force, Bedfordshire has had to make do with special grants to tackle serious and violent crime. Does the Prime Minister agree that proper police funding is essential for keeping people in Luton North safe? And will he ensure Bedfordshire Police receive the grants we need to fight crime on our streets?
Well, I thank you for raising this case. And she and I have met far too many families devastated by this senseless violence. We are taking urgent action to ban zombie-style knives and regulating the online sale of knives. It is unacceptable that these murder weapons can be bought with 2 clicks. Technology is there to stop it, and we're going to take action. And on the resources, we're putting an additional 13,000 police into neighbourhood roles and allocating £85 million to Bedfordshire Police in funding to keep her constituents safe.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Mr. Speaker, may I associate with the remarks from the Prime Minister regarding the ceasefire and the release of hostages, and let's all pray that the remaining hostages on both sides are released as soon as possible. Since the ceasefire in Gaza came into effect, Israeli forces have placed the whole of the West Bank under strict military inspection as part of the Iron Wall operation. The IDF has launched a large-scale offensive operation in the city of Jenin, with numerous drone strikes on the infrastructure and a military raid by IDF troops and special forces in the occupied West Bank. At least 9 people have been killed by Israeli forces and 40 people injured, including several healthcare workers. What steps is the government taking to urgently protect Palestinians, including healthcare workers, and to prevent atrocities in the West Bank? And will he outline the UK's response to the ICJ advisory opinion on Israel's unlawful occupation?
Minister.
I'm deeply concerned by what's happening in the West Bank, and we've raised it a number of times in the various exchanges that we've had, but I am deeply concerned about it, and we're doing everything we can to alleviate the situation.
Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tamworth Castle, boasting 1,000 years of history, was recently added to the Heritage at Risk Register following my campaign about its future. Despite needing repairs, it provides a unique and valuable learning environment, welcoming both the public and schools to learn about Tamworth's rich history. Will the Prime Minister come and visit Tamworth Castle to see how an 11th century castle is providing 21st century learning opportunities whilst promoting local heritage?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank you for a kind invitation? I particularly enjoyed Tamworth's recent FA Cup heroics against Tottenham, albeit they didn't quite win. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to protecting our most vulnerable heritage, and I know Historic England is working closely with Tamworth Borough Council to preserve this local treasure for future generations. It's particularly important to continue school visit programmes supporting our mission to get every child the best opportunities in life.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across England, there are 95,000 students who attend non-academised sixth form colleges. Of those colleges, 32 are currently on strike because the government didn't settle the funding for them back in last summer. I wonder, could the Prime Minister tell me whether he intended to create a two-tier education system for sixth form students who are the victims of the COVID crisis?
Prime Minister.
We have put more money into colleges, and it's really for them to deal with these disputes, as she knows.
Lee Ingham.
Mr. Speaker, from Stafford to Eccleshall to Loggerheads, my constituents are sick and tired of having their properties and businesses devastated by flooding. The last Conservative government did not invest enough in flood prevention measures to stop this from happening. Can the Prime Minister assure me and my constituents that he will prioritise flood prevention investment before the homes and businesses on Sandon Road in Stafford disappear completely into Sandyford Brook?
Prime Minister.
Well, my sympathies go to her constituents. Far too many are experiencing terrible flooding. I visited there last year and met them, and they talked me through the misery of their experience. We inherited flood defences in their worst condition on record. We are now investing £2.4 million in flood defences to better protect communities, and committed £60 million to support farmers impacted by the extreme weather.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you. 2-year mortgages have hit 5%. Borrowing is billions above forecast. Retail sales have slumped. Does the Prime Minister still believe the Chancellor is doing a good job?
I thought she was just reading out their last record.
Final question, Matt Turmin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Excuse me. Before the last election, the Conservatives baselessly promised a fully funded scheme to deliver a new Watford hospital, something they have failed to achieve in 14 years. Does the Prime Minister share my frustration and that of my constituents that they unforgivably failed to budget for its construction, and Watford will only get its new hospital built and paid for thanks to the properly planned approach of this Labour government?
I'm not surprised his constituents are frustrated. There was never a plan. The funding only ever existed in Boris Johnson's imagination. It was pure fiction, and they know it. We have an affordable and delivery plan to build these new hospitals, and that includes Watford General, and we'll be getting on with it.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
We now come to the urgent question. Andrew Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business and Trade if he will make a statement on the position of the Chairman of the Competition and Markets Authority.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the resignation of the Chair of the Competition and Markets Authority, Marcus Bockerink, the Secretary of State has appointed Doug Gurr as the interim Chair for a period of up to 18 months, while a new permanent Chair is appointed. The Secretary of State has expressed his gratitude for Marcus's leadership of the board of the CMA since his appointment in September 2022 and the work of the CMA in that time, particularly in response to cost of living pressures. As the Prime Minister set out in his speech at the International Investment Summit, this government will make sure that every regulator in the UK focuses on growth. With his background and experience as an entrepreneur and business leader, along with a clear understanding of the importance of new and developing technologies such as AI, Doug Gurr will bring the necessary strategic leadership to the CMA to enable it to promote growth for the benefit of businesses and consumers. As set out in the Industrial Strategy Green Paper, the Government will shortly be consulting on a new growth-focused strategic steer to the CMA. Whilst respecting the independence of the CMA and the decision-making of its panel members, the steer will be clear about the Government's expectations of the CMA in supporting growth across the economy.
Shadow Secretary of State Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for granting this important urgent question. What a desperate state we are in when the Business Secretary has to phone up the regulators to beg them for ideas to fix the lack of growth his own government policies have created. And I hope that when the regulators attended that roundtable last week, including the chairman of the CMA, they had the courage to put at the top of their list scrapping his 150-page, job-destroying, trade union-inspired employment bill, or to point out the jobs tax in the Chancellor's budget, or their socialist attack on inheritance,